Gale Banks.
Gale Banks.
Gale Banks.
Gale Banks. Gale Banks.
To call Gale Banks an engineer would be an understatement.
This is Speed School with Gale Banks.
School has begun.
Hey guys, welcome to Banks Speed School. I've got a very special guest today, Kevin Oeste, kind of an Illinois cat. He's a national celebrity in the automotive world, and his backstory is really interesting. And we have another thing in common here, not two things, one thing in common. Both our dads were cops. Welcome, Kevin.
Well, that's a heck of an intro there, Gale, and I appreciate that. Some of that was true that you said about me, but my dad was an officer, so you're right. How about that?
I was listening to the Bonneville podcast, which you call Bonneville Up to Speed.
Yes.
And you had Scott Clark on there. Mm-hmm. And the Vescos are very old friends of mine, in more ways than one. We're all old. And they've been after that Turbinator for what now? Decades.
Decades, yeah.
And I think Don drove it first, perhaps. Don's now gone, of course. And Rick is kind of spearheading everything. But listening to you draw out Scott Clark prompted me to want to talk to you.
Well, I appreciate
it. Turns out you wanted to accept that invitation, and so we're kind of doing podcasting both ways here at the same time.
Yes, right on. And thank you so much for listening. And to me, the Bonneville Up to Speed podcast is kind of a passion project. You are no stranger to land speed racing, and then, of course, water and anything that goes fast. Banks has been around it. But today, we're in a different and changing world, and kind of the mission of that podcast is to help people understand a little bit more about it, but then maybe make it a little more identifiable and make it so that people get the urge to maybe try it and go out and see it and be part of it and know that they can do that. And what I think is fantastic is your history, especially with, land speed racing, El Mirage, and, all that stuff. You started back before there were, these incredibly high-tech streamliners and technology that really the average hot rod enthusiast might not even understand. So you come from the beginning of all this stuff in many ways, which is a really great way, for you to kind of tell us that story of how you got involved with all this stuff and then kind of what's going on today.
Yeah, it kind of came from a childhood fantasy. I wanted to have the fastest car in town. I lived in a small town, Linwood, California. You live about 30 miles from St. Louis, as I recall.
That is correct, yeah.
Are you anywhere near Quincy?
I'm not far. Quincy's north of us, but I know the area for sure.
Really great stuff came out of Quincy. One of my air compressors was a Quincy back in the day. But more than that, I think Motorola came out of Quincy.
I think you're right.
And Quincy is on a bluff, part of it, above the river. Is it the Missouri it's above or the...
It's the Mississippi. It's on the edge.
It's
there.
okay. Yeah. I think the two come together somewhere up in there. The guy who started Motorola, this is kind of a folk tale, had to do with cars. He wanted to take his girlfriend down and sit on the bluff and look at the river and wanted to have music. Mm-hmm. So he put a radio in his car and made it happen. Battery operated it and what have you. And hence the name Motorola.
Right.
It was like a motorized Victrola.
Yes.
Who's old enough to know what a Victrola was?
Hey, you'd be surprised. Vinyl is really popular again these days.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, I just know where you're from, and boy, there's a lot of skill and inventiveness in your neighborhood. And I like to think, from a possibly different standpoint, there's a lot of it here on the West Coast. We had a lot of aircraft industry out here, and of course, you guys in the Midwest had the same damn thing. During World War II and thereafter, when the guys came back from World War II, you know, I'm 80 years old this year, so I was born in 42, and World War II was in action by then. But the guys started coming back, and a couple of them who became my mentors, Alex Exidius for one, and Ed Iskandarian for another. Those cats were a generation ahead of me. They're both 100. And
still around,
so,
yeah.
Yeah. Boy, I'm happy they are. I like having guys older than me still out there. But I got the benefit of going through all the big surplus yards in Southern California after World War II, and kind of fell in love with electronics. In high school, I took 4 years of electronics, 4 years of mechanical drawing. I've always been conflicted ever since, mechanical engineering and electrical engineering, until it became a benefit with the invention of the transistor in the mid-'50s. The other thing, though, other than my technical interests, became having a car, a hot car. I mean, I started with a 31 Ford, and I improved the airflow on that, taking it from about 40 horsepower stock to 105 horsepower. It all had to do with airflow and compression ratio and engine speed. All those things changed because I converted it to an F head. I put a Riley 4-port head on it, which was the at that time.
Oh, yeah.
Built my first header. This is like 1956. Built my first header, had a Wyco side drive Magneto driving off a timing gear, off of a farm tractor. Ed Iskandarian did a cam for it. Jans did the pistons. And 2 Winfield downdraft single throat carburetors. I think I've thought of all of it.
Well, that's, soup to nuts right there. And some great names that went on to, some are still around making performance parts.
The whole thing for me was, from the very beginning, how do I make each cubic foot, the cylinder's pump, more dense? How do I get more air mass in each cubic foot the engine pumps? That is the key to increased power, as is increasing the RPM. Naturally aspirated is kind of like camshaft. It's kind of like more throat area in the carburetor. So, wide open throttle, you still have a partial vacuum in the intake manifold. Only under really, really cool circumstances can you reverse that, but only slightly. In other words, have the air density in the intake manifold higher than the ambient air density. I saw my first turbocharger laying loose in Blackie's surplus yard down on Alameda. And he had Allisons and he had Merlins, all these V12 aircraft engines all over the place.
Wow.
You could buy one for $400, brand new.
Could you imagine?
In a crate.
Yeah.
Nobody had $400.
No, but still.
I got that thrill later in life through Jay Leno and me owing him some favors, and I turbocharged his V12 tank engine in his tank car. Anyhow, back to Bonneville, though. Along about 53, imagine this. I mean, I'm 11 years old, and there's a Studebaker dealership near our home, and I see this car appear. My Studebakers are quirky, odd-ass-looking cars in the early 50s, and then all of a sudden, this incredibly streamlined, swoopy-looking 53 Studebaker Starlight Coupe is on the showroom floor, and I'm going, oh my God, what if you hopped that up and went to El Mirage?
Yeah, I mean, it had to look like a spaceship compared to everything else at the time.
It just, talk about, it came from another dimension. It was aerodynamic. I think Raymond Loewy drew that car with a real high hit of French streamlined modern or deco vibe. I mean, Loewy did all kinds of stuff. He did the Coke bottle with a pinch in the middle. Yep. That's Loewy. He did typewriters, I think it was for Underwood, that were beautifully styled mechanical typewriters.
The paint scheme
on Air Force One. He was the industrial artist, industrial designer of his era, as far as I'm concerned. So I instantly had to own one of those, and I'm 11 freaking years old.
That's great.
Yeah, it was years later. And I actually bought one out of a junkyard with a blown engine in it from a neighbor who owned an auto wrecking place called Babe's Auto Wrecking in Downey out near where we used to cruise Harvey's Broiler, which was a big hot rod cruise spot on the east side of L.A. And I bought the car for $65.
Nice.
So I've got this 56 Studebaker, no powertrain, or the powertrain was really wounded. And I wanted to build the V8. And I became aware of this guy, George Sally. In 57, he had built, I think, the first lay-down offie in an Indy car, and won the race the next year. He built these cars at home. Studebaker had commissioned an Indy engine and gave that commission for the design of the Indy engine to Leo Guzin. Leo Guzin started out here in L.A. Working for Harry Miller and designing the Miller 91 Indy engines, which were inline straight eights. The most famous configuration was a board track or Indy type, a front drive car with the 91 cubic inch engine, centrifugally supercharged and very rudimentarily intercooled on alcohol. It made around 270 horsepower out of 91 cubic inches in 1928.
Nice.
Suffice it to say, Leo Guzin, this Dane, he had major chops when it came to designing a racing engine. Harry Miller went broke in the mid-30s after doing some Miller Ford, like Ford flathead-powered Indy cars that are still around in some collections. He wasn't a good money manager, but he was quite innovative. Anyhow, I could do Harry Miller for 2 hours easily. The guy was a genius and did some incredible boat, car, and even aircraft engines. Turns out George Sally had some of the parts from the Agajanian effort on that V8 double overhead cam Studebaker with Hilborn injectors. He didn't have the Hilborns, but he had some of the castings that were done. Where the hell he got them? It wasn't his program, but he had them. The cylinder heads and cams and what have you, allowing me to build a carbureted version using 2 Cadillac WCFB 4-barrels and a sheet metal manifold that I built and put it in that, it was intended to go in the 53 Studebaker. I ended up selling it for $1,100, marked my first engine sale of my career in 1958, and I put it in a 33 Plymouth Coupe for a buddy of mine. That got me going, though. I went, okay. So I hot rodded a Studebaker V8, which was 232 cubic inches, took it out to 260, and ran the Howard 8-cycle billet camshaft, chilled iron lifters, and all that jive. That thing, my 53 Studebaker would blow off then current Corvettes, late 50s Corvettes. In one race on the Corona Freeway, we used to call Highway 71, the thing had a 3-speed with overdrive, and I was in overdrive, and the Corvette was starting to catch me, and I pushed the pedal down too hard, and it kicked it back into third. And that Sun Tac was 8,500 RPM, went right off the end.
Ooh, boy.
Yeah, I stayed in it. I still pulled the guy, but I lost a few rod bearings in the process.
I bet.
Limped it home, went down to the Chevy dealership and bought a small block Chevy, and began the building of that car to go to El Mirage with a small block Chevy and a Rochester fuel injector. Ultimately, at the lakes, I got the C-Gas record. By today's standard, it doesn't sound like 159.01 was the record. Not much by today's standards, but pretty damn fast, around 59, 60. And that kind of got me going for the Bonneville thing. Took the Studebaker to Bonneville, won first in category. I think I was running high 180s, as I recall, but no record. Ran against a guy named Ron Armstrong in the same class, and he had a Studebaker, and he started that data logging company, RacePack.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So he was, at the time, as I recall, he was out of American Fork, Utah, one of the Utah boys, and a good guy. I had burned an exhaust valve, a TRW, I can almost remember the valve number. And we're at the salt, and of course there's no phones, no cell phones. You're out there on your own. Maybe a ham radio operator could get a signal out of there, maybe not. So I had to go into town. I had to call and have a valve greyhounded out of L.A. That's how you got them on the Greyhound bus. Mm-hmm. And that was going to take a few days. And Ron comes over. He says, "What's up?" And this is when I learned about Bonneville and what it meant to be in that group. He comes over and he says, "What do you need?" And I said, "Well, I burned an exhaust valve." Is it TRW on them? I said, "Yeah, I'm running those." He says, "I got a few of them."
Nice.
"I'll go get you one." So he goes and he gets me a valve, and the seat's fairly good. So I lapped it in, put the thing back together, and ended up beating Ron. I almost regret doing that, but it told me everything I had to know about Bonneville.
Yes. Well, so what happened there is that, the guy that you, in your mind, were kind of racing against, turns around to help you be successful. And in reality, I look at Bonneville as you're racing the record. You're racing the time. You're not racing the guy next to you. It's not a drag race. And all of us want to see success happen at the Salt, and the really good people that go out there realize that you're on your own, and anybody that you're going to need help at some point. And I think the circle of automotive karma comes around, which, makes people want to help others, and you do have that in other, in other forms of racing. But I really think the more money that gets involved, the tighter the circle becomes, and you're not going to see a Formula One team loaning engine parts to another one, but out on the Salt, you will.
Well, and at the time, you are all out there, all by yourselves. It's different today. Although I think the camaraderie at the Salt will never go away, honestly, Kevin. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful thing.
Well, can I back
That was
you?
my first experience with Bonneville. Basically, I had done also during the 70s. There's a cat named Al Holbert. Al Holbert raced for Porsche, and he then went to running a Decon Monza road race IMSA car. I'd say by 1975, 76, he won the national championship in his Decon Monza. Well, a cat named Roy Woods out of Oklahoma City bought the car, asked me to do a turbo setup for it, and we took it from like 585 horsepower with 4 Weber carburetors to 930.
Oh, man.
Took it down to 5 liters, what would that be at Bonneville, a C engine?
Yeah, like a C class.
Might even be a D engine, top end of D. Top end of D is 305. Yeah, it was a D engine. It was like taking from a C engine at 358 inches to a D engine at 304.9 or whatever. And we went to 930 horsepower. So we put it in this Monza, and it's a pretty cool car at the time. Tube frame, wasn't a stock Monza part on the car.
Sure.
Kind of reminiscent of a Monza.
Yeah.
Big wings, big front air dam, all that jive.
Well, those IMSA cars were really cool.
They're, extremely so. We road raced it a bit, took it out to Willow Springs, and it was so fast down the front straight at moderate manifold air density, or boost as a younger guys like to say. Kind of the uninformed talk about boost. I talk about air density. That's the quantity of the air, the pounds per cubic foot. Boost is just the pressure of the air. Doesn't have anything to do with the temperature of the air or the humidity of the air. The dry air per cubic foot is it. So basically, we overwhelmed everything on the car, including the aerodynamics. The first really hot trip down that front straight, that front air dam fractured off the car, and Roy ran over it. I mean, it was a substantial piece of fiberglass.
But I can believe that because, you know, those cars, again, I understand it was far from a stock one, but those were very lightweight, you know, small cars. And then when you gut them and make them, you know, race ready, I don't even know what the regular class engine would have been in that type of car, but it certainly wasn't 900 plus horsepower. Well,
you know, at the time, we also had Can-Am cars, and Can-Am cars had a power-to-weight ratio, 4 pounds per horsepower, 3.5 pounds per horsepower, kind of super bike stuff. Now, this IMSA car was the equivalent of that. I mean, it was badass. So we put another front air dam on it, safety wired, put all kinds of structure with safety wire to strengthen it. Next time around, he blows the backlight, the back plexiglass window, like this huge potato chip, went about 100 feet in the air. And we ran out of brakes.
Oh, boy.
So we ended up putting Ferrari brakes on it, and it was the hot lick at the time. Then I ran out of Roy Woods.
No.
You know, I could turn up the air density and the intake manifold, and I got to a point, just to relate to manifold pressure, it was only about 10 psi of boost level. And I had good charge air cooling on this thing. Because I used kind of boat liquid coupled charge air cooling, which was not vogue anywhere, except in what I was doing in the boats through the 70s. It could lay it down, and you could stay in the loud pedal for a very long time before you'd heat saturate that thing. You know, I'd turn up the manifold density, and Roy'd go the same lap times. So he was regulating the lap speed.
Oh, what a great test. Yeah, interesting.
We took it to Portland for the G.I. Joe Grand Prix, and long straightaway up there. And it started shooting ducks at the end of the straightaway. And I was running a pressurized carburetor on the thing, which was my way of doing those. A lot cheaper and easier to maintain than the fuel injection of the day. I could make the carburetor follow the necessary air-fuel ratio pretty well. Through some interior partial fuel injection that I did. He goes, you know, his crew chief's going, it's that carburetor. I'm going, dude, we haven't even hit the turn, and it starts shooting ducks. It's leaning out. Well, I've got, you know, 2 Holley pumps on there and a third one in reserve. That should have been the key right there, the reserve one. We get back to the shop. He had the pumps upside down. Back in the day, you had to put the pumping section below the motor. He'd put them above the motor, so the fuel would feed down the shaft, get into the motor, and kind of freeze up the pumps. Okay. Which is why he had the spare one mounted, so he could just change the lines to the spare one.
Oh, it was a Band-Aid.
Yeah. And I went, you know what? You got the pumps upside down. Yeah, that's not it. So I built a flow stand, took it over there to their shop and flowed the capacity of the car and compared it to the engine's demand. And I said, car won't support the engine. And he had Roy convinced, it's that damn carburetor. And so I said, tell you what, why don't I take one of the engines, go out and see if one of my buddies from Bonneville would let me put it in a car and run it at the Salt. So I called Levan Prothero. He wasn't interested, so I called Bruce Geisler. Well, Bruce Geisler was in seclusion. He'd been kind of pouting for a couple of years because they ran him out of the hierarchy of SCTA.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I don't want to go. I finally convinced him, I'll come and get the Studebaker. I'll make it run. If you want to go, fine. If not, can I take your car and you go run it? Because I want to prove to these road race guys that it's a viable, long, straight engine. And we got 5, sometimes 6 miles back in the day. In fact, I've been there when it was, I think we had 7 one time.
Wow, big straight.
You know, like 13 miles to the center mile. I mean, overall length. We run it. The car ran 217. Didn't skip a beat with a road race engine. Then we went a one-way with Jack Choate driving it, and he was running close to 230, and it was running those 18-inch Hallebrand mags with the old 18-inch Indy tires on the rear. A lot of guys up there on the Lakesters and early Streamliners would run those Firestone Indy tires. I ran them on some of my efforts as well.
Well, you didn't have a whole lot of options for tires at that speed.
No,
at that
you
point.
didn't. You didn't. Anyhow, those mag wheels were the issue. Stu Hilborn got had by one with his open wheel car. I think it was El Mirage, where he almost got killed by one of those mags exploding. Jack Chode almost got killed at Bonneville in Geisler's car, right around 232 miles an hour.
Wow.
He got a mile at that speed, and the left rear wheel exploded and took a lot of Studebaker with it.
Jesus.
It did not roll. It spun. I couldn't get Jack back in the car. We repaired it. We went to numerous drivers because the Studebakers are tail happy above about 215, 220. It had to be stock body, so I couldn't put a wing or anything on the back end. We put air vents through the car. That was legal at the time, from underneath to behind the rear window.
Okay, yeah.
The reason a lot of cars fly the tail is the air separates coming off the roof and gives you a low pressure area over the trunk lid.
A wing right there.
Yeah, so then you start losing traction on the rear, and when that happens, the back wants to be the front and the front wants to be the back, and it does it repeatedly.
Yes.
First time it happened, I don't know if you remember Tom Center. He was a writer at Popular Hot Rodding magazine back in those years.
Okay.
And the first time it happened, he stands up, "Hey, Gale," I'm at the line. He can see the cloud of salt in the air from him looping the car. He goes, spins his hand around. I go, "Holy shit, what's this?" We spun that Studebaker, went through about 5 drivers before Don Stringfellow would stay in it. And we did spin-out badges, like World War II fighter aces had the Japanese or the German logo on their fighter.
Yeah.
In the little rear quarter window, we had these decals made for spinning out the car.
Yep.
There was 9, 10, 12 of them in there, whatever. Don Stringfellow, first time he spun the car, kind of a laconic dude who was a salesman here at my shop. He's driving it. And I get up beside the car, he's spun out. We get him off the course, and I said, "Hey, Don, how many times did it go around?" He said, "Well, Gale, I was so busy counting beads, I didn't have time to count the spins."
That's great.
Must have been of the Catholic
That's
persuasion.
right. Yeah. He's got the world's fastest rosary right there.
Yeah.
So that still happens. You're right. When people have a new program or a new car, or they're getting into a faster speed, and all of a sudden the rear end comes around, and it's got to be pretty hairy.
Oh yeah. So moving into the 80s. Late 70s, we did this 217 record with Geisler's car. And to put it into perspective, guys with Studebakers, I'm trying to think, Armenian dude that had a piston company. I mean, there were guys that were running blown engines, big stuff, running 202, 204. And we come in with this 300-incher, and we run 217, and then that 230 death pass where we fragged the wheel. So I'm not sure the car would have gone straight in any way. We started getting into other stuff, and a guy named Bob Kehoe and Dwayne McKinney, 2 friends of mine. Kehoe had a 68 Corvette, and he named it the Sundowner, and the car's still around, and lots of cats have owned it by now, and it's still named the Sundowner.
Yep, I've seen it.
But Kehoe named the car because we all worked on it after work. So he brought it to my shop, and I was going to I was running 430-inch big blocks in the boats. We had the world's fastest jet boat. Literally, it blew off the inboard V-drive boats. One time, APBA let us combine the classes, and the jet boats are supposed to be wimps, and we killed everybody with it. It's called Hurry Round Hondo was the name of that. I won't get you into boats here. But, in the process, during probably the late 70s, Leo Guzin And Fred Offenhauser had left in the late 30s when Miller went broke. Offie had a shop down the alley on the other side of the alley. So they came in when the day bankruptcy was declared by Miller. The bankers padlocked the place. Unfortunately, they used the same padlocks that Offenhauser had. So they took a lot of the machinery out of there for the four-cylinder Offenhauser engine, which Gusen also designed. The Offie four-banger dominated Indy for years, as you probably know.
Yep.
And then it didn't because Ford got in with a V8 thing. Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, the double overhead cam Ford V8 setup was designed by, I'll give you a guess, Leo Gusen.
Wow.
This guy was everywhere. That got to be the major threat. The Drake family bought in Meyer Drake Offenhauser. There was some money. Leo did a fresh design on the engine for the purposes of turbocharging it. It had been a naturally aspirated race engine for decades.
Now, what was the bottom end on that one?
It was just a four-banger. It's a scratch-built engine, a custom racing engine. Tubular connecting rods. In my outer office years ago, as probably a birthday present, Al and Jane Teague had obtained one of Leo Gusen's engine blueprints. And it's huge, and it's framed in my outer office.
Nice.
So influenced my line of thinking in talking with those older guys on how they got air in and out. But the facilitator for extending the life of the Offenhauser Indy engine was an outfit called Garrett Air Research. Mm-hmm. And they're over here in Lomita and Torrance area. They're still there. And a guy was in the hierarchy of the company at that time, later to become the president of Garrett Air Research. His name was Walt Ware. And Walt was supplying Indy guys with turbochargers. And the one for the Offenhauser was called a TEO 691, and it was as esoteric and bulletproof as Walt and the guys at Garrett could make it. And everybody that turbocharged at Indy in those years used that turbocharger. Mm-hmm. Walt also, for my boat racing, supported me with the same turbocharger. So what was capable of making up to 1,100 horsepower on an Offenhauser, about 168 cubic inch Offenhauser, I ran two of them on my boat motors. Smaller ones on the offshore engines. I started facilitating the banning of turbocharging first in boats. We were racing offshore. Those races are at least 200 miles in length and basically wide open throttle for 200 miles.
Sure.
And those engines at the time were you could have big engines. I ran 430s, 500 cubic inches was the limit. And we won commandingly in offshore racing with the turbo engines, and they were making 930 horsepower. Second year we ran, pushed us down to 400 cubic inches. We still won and set the kilo speed records and what have you. Third year, they pushed us down to like 358 inches. It's hard to build a big block that small.
Yeah.
But we did and buzzed them a lot higher. So we didn't lose much in the way of horsepower. We just upped the engine speed. Ed Iskandarian and his cam program, all through those years. Iski's the first guy to ever sponsor me back about 1960. But all through those years, we used Iski. At 358 inches, we won the World Championships at Key West. The other thing was the reliability of the engines. Most teams had 8 engines, 2 in the boat, 2 in the transporter, 2 in transport to the engine builder or back, and 2 at the engine builder being built. They changed the engines virtually every race, and those are big 500-inch naturally aspirated engines. We're running 430-inch. We're outpowering them, and we're outliving them. And that year, those 358 inchers had run the entire season, won virtually every race, and then went to Key West, won the category there, and set the kilo record, all on the same pair of engines the entire year.
The whole time, yeah.
Yes. Turbocharging, unlike belt-driven supercharging, is much easier on the engine.
For sure.
So I've got all this endurance engine background, and then pure all-out, another 430-incher in that Hondo circle boat, running those 5-mile heat races and stuff like that. That had 2 of the Indy turbos on it and ran on methanol with no charge air cooling, similar to what the Indy guys were doing at the time. The latent heat of vaporization of that fuel is a great heat absorber. It was soft. It was running about 1,800 horsepower in an 18-foot boat. That'll make your digestive system work backwards. That's all I can say.
I can imagine, yes.
Pucker you up something fierce.
100 horsepower per foot, huh?
Yeah. And it burned a lot of methanol in 5 miles, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
All of that went into a program that, about 1979, we had done the turbo development for Volvo on their 4-cylinder B21 red block in the 75, 76, 77 range. I got a contract from Volvo to do a first design because they wanted to get into turbocharging, and they still are in turbocharging.
Oh, yeah.
So it's been decades. So we built the prototype, did cast manifolds. I mean, it made it OEM in its appearance. And that came after building a research safety car for the NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, in 75 or so. The guys at Pontiac got wind of the Volvo four-banger with the project we'd done. I don't know how, but they sent me a couple of Pontiac Sunbird 4-cylinder cars, and they wanted to come out with a turbo dealer-installed option.
Oh.
Which would be a Banks turbo kit on a production car. Well, we couldn't legally sell that in California due to the CARB regulations.
Right.
You know, Kevin, we'll continue on with my Pontiac saga here in a moment, but your podcast with Scott Clark, and I'm sure your other pods are really cool. I hope you've got a hell of a big audience for the stuff you're doing. And of course, you're doing so many other things with your shop, and I'm looking at an aerial view of your body and paint, mechanical, fabrication, interior. Whoa, what an operation you've got. Yeah, my God.
Well, listen, I appreciate the kind words on the podcast and all of it. And the truth, you know how it is. You're not an island. You know, you don't do this by yourself. And you've mentioned, a lot of your team and the engine builders and the people that you have that have helped. We're the same way. My wife runs the daily operations, and she's a lot smarter than I am. So the shop runs the way it does because of her, which allows me to do, kind of my nonsense, which is do the podcast, do the video stuff, do the live appearances with emceeing events and working with SEMA and all that. And I'm just super, super fortunate to have the opportunity to do this kind of stuff. So I really appreciate that, you got something out of that podcast, because that's the whole point. We're just trying to perpetuate the stories and get the information out there in a way that people can dig.
It's kind of interesting and convoluted talking about the shaft speeds in that turbine, N1 and N2. Mm-hmm. N1 is the shaft speed of a little jet engine, which can turn up to about 13,000 RPM maximum. You don't want the tip of the impeller or blades in a turbocharger or in a turbine to go beyond the speed of sound.
Right.
And, this is common to all these types of compressor situations. And two, all the energy coming out of that little jet engine then goes into just a turbine. No combustor in it. Get those big rotors going on a Chinook, which I think their engine is out of, basically. That's a chore. And, of course, the rotors on the Chinook are huge. Those things will lift the world.
Yes.
And they have a maximum tip velocity of 350 miles an hour. 350 RPM provides you with a safe tip velocity.
Yes.
You go higher, they go sonic. To show you how this comes close to home, we do a lot of military engine business. And I have done that since 1976. When we first sold our first twin-turbo big-block Chevy Marine engines to Navy Special Forces. Back then, they were called the UDT Frogmen. They were out of Virginia Beach, Virginia. UDT being underwater demolition teams. And they started buying engines, 540 horse engines that would run on what we call battle gas, 84 octane, meaning they could run them anywhere in the world on that native gasoline.
But also an interesting compression design.
The other day, there's a 3-star general here, and we're talking about, for 15 years, I've wanted to do diesel hybrid engines for the armed forces. Huge advantages to do that. The major one is the tactical advantage of silent running or silent operation. Finally, our company, Banks Technologies and Banks Power, have been retained to do hybrid prototype power systems for numerous wheeled and tracked vehicles, up to 60 tons or so. So we're hot and heavy on that. This is an aside. We supply the engines for the highest production military vehicle in the world, and that is the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle made by Oshkosh Truck that replaces the Humvee in tactical situations. So we have an engine plant here in California, and we've done 18,000 some odd engines so far.
Nice.
And we should be doing that out through 2034 or so. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. You boat race for years. You go to Bonneville, those long runs, and years ago we started running Pikes Peak. Open class, and then finally the Size Matters 2 diesel truck, which we super turboed. And I think it's the quickest semi-based thing to ever go up the mountain.
Incredible truck.
And in a way, Pikes Peak, I'm a little off my Pontiac story, which will lead to the Firebirds, but in a way, Pikes Peak is very similar to the guys at Bonneville. The only difference is you only get one run. One. That's it. Brake, go off to the side, whatever the hell you do or the weather. Holy God.
Oh, yeah.
When we ran the Freightliner Cascadia, which, by the way, the engine is down a foot and back 6 feet. It's a mid-engine Cascadia.
Right.
It snowed. It rained. We went through fog.
Yeah, temperature differential from low to high and atmosphere.
All of it.
Yeah.
The air density changed from low to high. I first went to Pikes Peak to develop engines for the Navy Special Forces in Afghanistan at 14,000 feet of altitude.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, the first turbo aircraft engine was tested on a truck bed at the top of Pikes Peak.
No kidding.
1928 or so. Yeah.
That's a great piece of trivia right there.
And then promptly, it was GE project, the engine, promptly increased the world altitude record from about 17,000 feet to, 27,000.
Well, they kind of get a handle on the understanding of what it needed.
Yeah. I mean, turbochargers and centrifugal-driven superchargers dominated. I think the B-29s were turbocharged. I'm trying to, P-38s were for sure. I think the P-51s were. It runs all through there. Some of the stuff is centrifugal. The P-51s were Merlins. They were centrifugals. Anyhow.
A couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of spending about an hour and a half doing an interview with Bobby Unser, and the Pikes Peak stories that he was sharing are phenomenal. A totally new respect for that hill. So,
Bobby was a dear friend. I miss him.
He was a great guy.
The best.
Yeah, yeah.
Of all the answers. I've turbocharged stuff for Al Sr., Al Jr., Johnny, one of the cousins, but a good racer, and Bobby. And I got to tell you, he was one of the finest gentlemen I've ever met in my life.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Really, really was.
Yeah. So here we are. It's 1979. I've lost this deal because of CARB with Pontiac, but Pontiac comes back, and they kind of reach out, and I become aware of what's going on through some of the guys at Hot Rod Magazine, and Pontiac wants to have me build a demonstration of their new aerodynamic 82 Firebird.
Mm-hmm.
So I get a call we had run the Sundowner Corvette with a 430 in it in 1980, and we had gone 240 miles an hour. Tom Center did an article, a 2-page spread of the car, the image of the car in Pop Rod, and called the article 240 Sporty, which was
pretty cool, yeah.
Typical Center. Well, the guys at Pontiac had the magazine open on their desk.
Cool.
They called me up, and it's Bob Dorn, who I had known at Cadillac. He was a chief engineer at Cadillac when I met him. And here we are now. He's the chief engineer of Pontiac. And John Chanella, the chief stylist, who came up with the Firebird, is on the phone with him. And they're going, we've been in the wind tunnel a lot with this 82 Firebird, and probably the most aerodynamic car in production, or will be when it comes out. We want to prove that. Can you put one of your turbo setups, like the 68 Corvette, the Sundowner, into a Firebird? And I said, well, yeah, I can. But it's a year and a half before they're going to be in the dealerships. Well, we've got a car at Mesa at the Proving Grounds. We end up with that car. We had a enclosed trailer, all that jive, and keep it in seclusion here at the shop. They had guaranteed me, just put your powertrain, take it out of the Corvette, and put it in our car, and you'll go 20 miles an hour faster. I says, are you telling me the 68 Corvette, Larry Shinoda did a job on this thing? This thing's a Mako shark. Of course, Larry had done the 63 split window, which I sold to start my first retail speed shop. I was an engine builder up till 67. So Chanella says to me, a 68 Corvette is like firing an arrow feathers first. I said, what are you saying? He says, it's more aerodynamic backwards.
Wow. Well, and I think there's definitely some truth to that, because what people don't realize is those things, they become a wing at speed. They're beautiful, but they get light.
Well, especially if the nose starts lifting.
Yes.
And then she's a no steer worth a damn. I says, 20 miles an hour, huh? So we get the car. It ends up with the trusted Ford 9-inch in the back and a Nash 5-speed. Pontiac gave me body mounts, axle mounting stampings that we put on the Ford axle. We ultimately built a bunch of street versions of this car. And so we ended up going to the Salt. I think it was 86 was the first year we finally got there. We had rain a few years. There were other things. But preceding that, in 83, I sold one to a gentleman in South Africa who owned the speed trials record in South Africa, which they ran on the highway. They block off the highway outside of Joburg at 6,000 feet of altitude.
Oh, wow.
And he wanted to, he had a German Capri with one of my engines, small block twin turbos in it. And he held the record, but Audi was coming for him. And he feared Audi, so he says, build me a Firebird, and I'd like a 430-incher, one of those in it. And I did, and he also wanted to go 240, like the Corvette had. He ended up, we shipped it to South Africa. A young guy who worked here flew over, met the freighter, introduced them to the car, and demoed it for them. Because, they drive on the other side there. A fast car and driving on the wrong side kind of freaked them out a bit. So he trained them on the car, and they ultimately drove it out to their speed trials. Initially ran 238, which was right on my 240 goal. And then there was some slight changes in the turbocharger configuration, bigger compressors, and they ran up 406 kilometers per hour, which is 252 at 6,000 feet of altitude. And then they drove it home. And he's a Ferrari guy and everything else. He still has that car.
Wow.
He loves that car. That was a predecessor. We knew we could go 252 with less aggressive engine. So when we ran in 86, we ran a 267 one-way, and on the way back, 260 two-way average. Exactly 20 miles an hour faster.
Wow.
As predicted.
That is unbelievable.
Cosmic. And the next year we went back, and we had some of the early Pontiac aluminum Pro Stock heads. The first engine was iron heads. We went back and we ran a 268 two-way, a 277 mile. We were eating the intake valves on the way back on that two-way pass. Big, huge Pro Stock intended tuliped the damn intake valves on the.
Oh, wow.
But still, the record still stands today. We set that record in 87. It was not exceeded for 14 years until 2001 by my friend Kugel and a guy trained engine building, Mike Lefevre's.
Yes.
So that kept it in the family.
Yeah, for sure. How cool is that?
Pardon me, 97. It took them 10 years.
Yeah.
97. We didn't go for the 300. Our tires, we tested Mickey fronts. We started the wide tire thing. Took me 2 years to get SCTA to accept the wide. I used Charlotte or Talladega tires.
Okay.
Tested them at Smithers Scientific in Akron to 320 miles an hour. Even though the treads came off, they were still inflated.
Oh.
But they were solid to about 305. But the fronts were Mickey's Bonneville tires, and they went to about 282. So I didn't want to run the car beyond 280.
No, you don't want to do that.
But Stringfellow, on that 277 one-way, he had a 283 back door. It was right at 280.
That's amazing. And that was a very, very close to a stock body, wasn't it?
Yeah, the only thing we did where the turn signals were in the front fascia. We did a front fascia with air intake for each turbocharger, one on either side.
Sure.
Because I'm a Ram Air fanatic. That's the poor man's supercharger. Is a Ram Air, cold Ram Air, true cold Ram Air system.
Sure.
Every time I see an open element air filter on a blower under a hood, I just go, well, there's basic stupidity. I'm looking at this. God, why induct 180 degree or 170 degree air that's now expanded and less dense, and then compress it again and run it through an intercooler?
Right.
Do you realize what you're losing by doing that and how lame and stupid that is? So, well, there's another name, ignorant.
Well, yeah, they didn't know yet because they haven't listened to you, and there you go. But
it's not me. Air density is no mystery. And I got a cheap little gauge that measures it. I mean, you can suss out an entire blower system or turbo system using one of these instruments, called an iDash, because we're in the electronics thing real big.
Oh, yeah.
So I've taken you out through the Pontiac saga, and it was a wonderful experience. Next time we talk, the whole GMC Psychlone project, that was us for 2 years. I ran with Al Teague and Alan Welsh, the Teague Welsh Bank Streamliner. We've got some international records that still stand there. We ran the diesel pickup record in our little Dakota. All of these have really cool backstories.
Oh, yeah.
But the diesel pickup record, I have an FIA world record at 217, which we set in October of 2002. We towed the pit trailer onto the salt with the truck. Our best mile was 222. Mike Cook was up there working with us on this one, the FIA deal. We had set a Bonneville record of 213, a national record, and then we went up there and we went 217. Back then, an FIA record, maybe it's still the same. You had to go two ways within 1 hour of starting the first trip. You had to brake the lights coming back within 1 hour of braking the lights going down.
Yeah, you got to get that right.
So it wasn't a next day going the same direction both days. If the prevailing winds to your back, you're getting a boost. You can't do that with FIA records, so they're a bitch to get.
Yeah.
A guy in that same category came back in the diesel pickups named something Lagarde, running a Ford. We set that record in 2002. It was 5 years later. This guy blew. He had intercoolers in the truck with him where the passenger seat would be. One of them blew up.
Oh.
Blew the windshield out of the car on the salt. He blew up Ford V8s left and right and finally went 215. And the magazine guys, fastest diesel pickup in the world. So I kind of phoned up a few of them. I said, well, no. We went 217. Lagarde's going to have to blow up a few more Fords
to catch up,
to come and get us. Yeah. Well, one's a national record and the other one's international. It's almost the same. I said, dude, you don't know a damn thing about FIA. Whew.
Yeah, that return trip in an hour.
Oh, my God. Anyhow, we ran the GMC Psychlone project, a lot of with the Teague Welch Banks Streamliner. The Sidewinder Dakota is its own story. Much more to talk about next time.
Absolutely, for sure. And I remember, I still have all the hot rod magazines with the Cyclone and, of course, the Pontiacs and, going way back. And I don't know if you remember this, but this goes back to probably 2000, maybe 2001, when I was working for Hot Rod. And we did a shoot at your facility. And we shot video there all day, and you and I were talking as the crew was kind of repositioning cameras and stuff. And I looked around, and I see all these, turbo engines on stands, and I said, this makes me think of a magazine cover from I think it was May 1970, Hot Rod magazine, and it was a thing on Buicks, and they had this Buick engineer surrounded by these engines. And you're like,
I'll never forget that cover.
You said, I want to do that. So we grabbed that picture and that shot, and it's in the video.
I remember it vividly, Kevin, like it's yesterday.
Yeah, that was fun.
It was a big deal. And we had done Gary Kolofsky's yellow Willys Coupe, 1980 Hot Rod of the Year. And then Gary came to work here for a year. He builds the damnedest cars with aircraft engines and tank engines. And oh, my God, Kolofsky's, he's a special treat. Math teacher in Wayzata, Minnesota. Huh. Man, there's a lot of backstories, a lot of stuff through the 80s. I was the only guy really doing serious turbocharging.
Yeah.
Brought it out of the boats into the cars, and we did all kinds of stuff. And one day, I don't know if it was Lenny who said it to me. I think it was Emanuelson said, and this would be later in the 80s, you're getting so much ink on the stuff you do, people are wondering if you bought stock in Peterson Publishing.
Yeah, well.
And I said, I think I'm earning my space. And I did stuff for Lenny, like we did a Corvair turbo muffler test comparison. 1 year where I wore out one of my big block naturally aspirated boat motors on my engine dyno. There was a 52 horsepower spread on a naturally aspirated big block between the worst and the best.
Wow.
And they did not know how to put that up in the magazine.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Because somebody was going to get offended.
That's it. Somebody loses when there's a shootout.
But, you know, I was trying to pay Hot Rod back, although as long as I had the new stuff, kind of the cutting edge stuff going on, it made good reading.
For sure. Yeah. There was, you know, that's the great thing is they were always about trying to be the first out there with all the cool stuff. And you know, so were you. So, I mean, it was a nice relationship.
You know, Kevin, I'm kind of interested how you got into this and having a shop in the middle of the country. How did you get to Bonneville? How does that all work out? Well, can you give me a little backstory?
It's a great question. And so I'm originally from the Chicago area, right? So I grew up, like many of us, reading Hot Rod Magazine and playing with cars and doing whatever I could. And like you said at the beginning of the show, my dad was a police officer. So my first experience with speed was in the passenger seat of a police car. So he would take me on ride-alongs when I was, 6 years old. And
He didn't break the law, did he?
Not once. But I vividly remember going down these side streets of the Chicago suburb that I grew up in, and we're talking, a 1975 or so Dodge Monaco, probably a 383 car, police car, with Mars lights rotating, on top. Mm-hmm. And the light beams would project out on the houses as we went by, and it was dark out and we're going fast. It was just this dizzying, intoxicating experience. And I thought, I love this. This is fun. So growing up, I did whatever I could to play with cars. And I was fortunate that my high school had a 10-watt FM radio station and a local access cable TV station. So I got a chance to play with some broadcast stuff. And I thought, if I could do this for a living, it wouldn't be so bad. And by working eventually for Hot Rod Magazine and producing their TV show, I was able to put the two skills together. And that's, the kind of story of getting into cars. And when it came to Bonneville, my wife and I left L.A. back to the Midwest to her hometown of Waterloo, Illinois, to start our production business and start our shop. But I never forget looking at all those photographs, Gray Baskerville's coverage of Bonneville and Speed Week. And I had posters of, all these cars on the wall. And I had been there as a child. My dad and I and my mom and my sister took a family vacation to California. We stopped there at the Salt Flats, and I got this picture of my dad in front of the mountain, and I was always fascinated by it. And it wasn't until probably almost 4 or 5 years ago that I finally got the opportunity to go out and hang out at Speed Week. And a good friend of mine, who's actually a customer of our shop, a guy that we've built a couple cars for, he said, "You're coming with me to Speed Week this year." And I said, "Man, same old excuse. I'd love to. I'm so busy. I can't, but it'd be cool." So it took him and my wife to book tickets and just push me out the door. Not that I didn't want to go, but it's just that I felt compelled and I had other stuff to do. Well, as soon as I got out there, it was on. I mean, just the experience of seeing it, first of all, if you've never seen what that landscape looks like, it'll blow your mind. And then, as you were mentioning, the camaraderie of the racers and the participants and the dedication of these people who go out and do this just because it's fun. I mean, just for the passion. There's no $1 million check at the end of the season. There's no sponsorship money. I mean, this is people that want to do it. And it's a direct connection to the beginning of hot rodding, which you articulated earlier on too. I mean, this is where it all started. So for me, it was kind of like this strange coming home to a place I'd never been, So,
But you feel real welcome.
Oh my gosh, it's incredible. And the people are wonderful. So I went a couple years in a row, and I wasn't out there to make waves. I was just standing around and observing and trying to pick up whatever I could. And last year, I recognized that these stories aren't getting out there, and there's so much information about this sport and about these events, and there needs to be some kind of mechanism. So I talked to Ron Main at the SCTA, and he's like, well, you know, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd like to do this podcast because it's something I'm interested in. It's just a passion project. And he and I talked about some logistics and finally said, well, let me run it past the board. And they said, okay, you know, and it's an interesting arrangement because I'm doing this with my company at V8TV Productions, but I wanted to make sure that it was in line with what the SCTA was all about. You know, I didn't want to speak out of school, you know, so to speak. And so far, it's been great. They've been great to work with. And I think this year, at the starting line, we're going to do some live stream video that I think I'll be hosting and interviewing racers at the starting line.
Great.
So it's a dream come true, man. It's super cool.
It's been a hot and cold place in terms of press. You know, back then, when I was running early 80s, mid 80s, it had been kind of fallen on, people weren't paying attention magazine-wise. You know, starting with that 80 deal with, well, the Studebaker in 79 and 80 with the Sundowner Corvette, and magazines started cranking up the press, and we had a lot more magazines then. Mm-hmm. So it was all over the place. And then with Pontiac, that was huge. Pontiac advertised and used us and brought that, hey, the salt flats is a thing back again.
Yeah.
And I think you're reinvigorating it now. Decades later, you're doing the same thing.
I mean, I truly hope so. I'm not going to say I've got anywhere near the juice of, you know, Pontiac and Hot Rod Magazine.
Yeah. I get it.
But it's funny, as you say this, I'm making the connection of the very beginning of the Knight Rider TV show, which launched that car on television to consumers. And I think that opening was shot at El Mirage, if I'm not mistaken.
Something like that. He lived, what's the guy's name? Hasselhoff.
Yeah.
The Hasselhoffs lived on Norumbega, just above where I live.
Of course.
It's wild. Oh, my God. Yeah, all this stuff comes back to roost.
Well, hopefully by doing this little show that I do, that, you know, we can get some people excited to go out and experience it for themselves.
Oh, it sounds like it.
It needs to keep going.
Yeah, the talking car with the eye that goes sideways across.
Right.
So tell me more about the shop.
Well, the funny thing is, we have a really, really talented staff of guys and gals who build primarily what we'll call pro touring street cars. So we do a lot of first-gen Camaros. We do a lot of C3 Corvettes and Mustangs, where we're taking modern drivelines and swapping them in. And today, you know, we're so spoiled by new cars that start every time and they don't leak and, you know, they run well, that when people get nostalgic and say, hey, I had a 67 Chevelle, man, I missed that. And they go buy one, and it's not anywhere near the experience of today's car because it's old technology with a carburetor and a choke and, you know, drum brakes. So we put all that stuff into the car to allow our customer to have the experience that they're kind of thinking of, you know. And
yes,
drivability is huge. They have to work. They have to do what they say they're going to do. And again, we've been very fortunate. We've had 10 SEMA cars over the years and stuff at all the big shows. And the best part is when you just see one driving down the street because it's getting used. But the irony is that we don't have any land speed cars in the shop. Maybe yet.
But in a way you do, because guys love to drive them to the salt. There's a retro group.
Oh, yeah.
And they're not there to race.
No.
It's a lifestyle thing.
For sure. And there's a great
they
show
up
at the Nugget Casino.
Check, they're doing the Betty Page look and all that jive. And it's cool. An old friend of mine really personifies that, a guy named Bobby Green. And Bobby Green does theme bars with a couple of his partners here in the Southern California area. I think they've got one up in San Francisco. Also owns the Old Crow Speed Shop, which is now in Pasadena.
Yeah, cool.
Used to be in Burbank. I don't know if you've ever heard of Bobby Green.
Oh, yeah.
If anybody who Googles him, they will find. We're running that Model A belly tank setup. I think that's the first thing he built and took to the salt. And, you know, in those vintage classes or four-banger, I think there's a XO. There's a lot of designations for those older engines and vehicles. I think he holds a few records with some of the stuff he's done.
It wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very
You
cool.
ever run into him?
I think I saw him out there actually at the Nugget Casino show. That
Yeah.
happens on Friday and Saturday nights. You know, after you get off the salt, you go hang out in the parking lot there and have a good time. And I believe he was out there one year.
One of his theme bars is in Venice. It's called Old Fields,
Okay.
after Barney,
After Barney, yeah.
Oldfield.
Yeah.
Barney Oldfield drove the Ford 999 against Winton, as I recall. I believe they raced on Lake St. Clair when it was frozen. And the 999 didn't have a steering wheel. It had a tiller
Oh, boy.
with two handles, left and right. And Ford couldn't drive the car, Henry Ford. So they hired this, I think at the time Oldfield was a bicycle/motorcycle racer, had never driven a car. He mastered it. They outlived Winton. Winton had a faster car, but they survived and won the contest. And that marketing kind of helped Ford's third company, Ford Motor Company. Ford had founded two companies and failed. Ford Motor Company was the third one, and Barney Oldfield helped him launch that company and gain reliability for his then-to-come Model Ts.
Wow. I never knew that.
There's a film, Ford History, that shows Ford driving that car. Absolutely false.
There you go.
It was Barney Oldfield. And that bar of Bobby Green's over in Venice, if you're a car guy, you got to go to Oldfield's. It's something special.
That's cool.
I actually did a commercial for Bobby Green's bar.
Yeah, right. There you go.
Sorry about that. But he's such a cat.
That's okay.
I love the guy.
Well, this has been really an honor, like I said, to be able to catch up and hear some of this stuff. And we're gonna have to do this again because there is so much more. I want to share one thing with you that I thought was kind of interesting, just to get your feedback on this. This was printed, and I'm just going to read this little statement verbatim, and it says, "These straightaway speed trials conducted on the smooth surface of the Bonneville Salt Flats located near Wendover, Utah, are presented in the interest of furthering the development of amateur automobile testing into a recognized and accepted American sport." When do you think that was written?
Oh, baby.
That was on the cover of the very first Bonneville National Speed Trials in 1949.
Thank you, Wally. Thank you, Bob.
Yes, so it seems like it worked. We have an accepted and recognized American sport.
So I was writing a piece for the program, the Bonneville program, way back. I got a hold of Wally Parks, and I said, well, Wally, three of you went up there. One marketing guy, whose name I can't remember, but I can sure remember Bob Peterson. They didn't go in Wally's car because Wally didn't think it'd make it. I don't know if it was Pete's car or if it was a marketing guy's car. And Wally says, I understand you're writing a short history to go in the program. I said, yeah. He said, I'm going to write you about the first time when we went to Salt Lake City and met with the state government to gain permission to do the Bonneville National Speed Trials in 1949.
Oh, cool.
I got to tell you something. Next time we do this, I'll have that letter and I'll read it to you.
All right.
Well, Kevin, this has been super interesting. I want to know more about you, the podcast, and your shop. How do people, first of all, find the podcast? And secondly, if somebody wanted to come by and see that shop operation and maybe do something at your place, where's the shop?
Sure. Well, the first question, the Bonneville podcast, it's called Bonneville Up to Speed, and you'll find it on all the major podcast services, between Apple Podcasts and Amazon and Spotify and all that jazz. So thank you for that. And yeah, our shop, the V8 Speed Resto shop, we are open weekdays, and we've got an open door policy. So if anybody wants to come by and see some of the hot rods and restorations and fun stuff we're working on, the doors are always open. We are about, like you said, 35 miles southeast of St. Louis. If you look at a map of the United States and put your finger in the dead center, that's kind of where we are. Well, listen, Mr. Banks, this was really, really cool. I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Oeste.
Yeah, well, try to be professional over here.
I have really enjoyed talking with you, although I stepped all over you.
No.
I wish you the best of luck with your Bonneville podcast. Who the hell else would do it and do it in such a professional manner and make it so interesting?
Well, again, I thank you. I appreciate the kind feedback. It's really, really much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Propensity for density is what it's all about. You got to take in lots of air and then you blow it out. It isn't just the CFM, you need the pounds per minute. You don't want to just blow air, you got to know what's in it. You want to make some power and you don't want to fail. Ask Gale, just ask Gale.
Oh, okay, it's time for your questions. If there's something you're dying to know, I'd do my best to answer it. And if not that, I'll just lie to you. You can write me at askgale@bankspower.com. So from Mohammed A., when will you start to sell the new Duramax turnkey engines? Will it be road legal? DEF, emission, smog. So here's the answer. Lockjaw is our development mule for the first version, which is a supercharged version of our turnkey series. And Matt is on it like mad. That thing will be up and running probably by the time you hear this. When we start to sell is when we're happy with it, how it runs, how it reacts to the throttle, and how durable it is. Will it be road legal? Yes, in 66 and earlier vehicles. It will be road legal with no emissions equipment. So I know there's guys who are calling and want to order the engine that's in Lockjaw. Well, until we're really happy with it, we're not just strapping a supercharger on a stock Duramax and walking away. This thing has to be really, really correct before I will sell it. I want to be able to sell you the engine and you'll put it in your vehicle and be able to drive from California to Florida or New York to Florida or Michigan to Florida. It seems like everybody's going to Florida. It's all about durability. You guys know us for durability, and that's what it's going to be. Also, we just passed what's called Euro 3. It's a emission standard for Europe, and it's kind of imperative on some of the stuff we're sending over there on the military side. So that being the case, these engines will be real close to Euro 3, which means it's pretty clean in its native form. It's reducing emissions through tuning, and that is possible to do. It's also very possible to increase emissions and blot out the sun with your smoke through tuning. Anyhow, we'll get the power. We won't blot out the sun. All our diesel records, Bonneville, whatever, have been set smoke-free. And those tend to be very durable records and set against guys who did blot out the sun. Well, anyhow, the Turnkey series is coming soon. Keep your britches on. If you like the show, please leave us a review on your Apple Podcast app or Spotify. It helps us to reach more people. Talk to you soon.
Be sure to subscribe for more episodes of Speed School with Gale Banks.
God. All right, is that enough?